Sponsorship, I don't think, is the best solution for long-term sustainable impact on these communities. What we've seen in our own ministry is that it creates a dependency on the organization to do the work. The question is, what role could child sponsorship have ongoing?
The Mission Matters podcast is a partnership between 1615 and Missio Nexus, who have a shared passion to mobilize the people of God to be a part of His mission.
Well, hello and welcome to the Mission Matters podcast. I am Matthew Ellison, and I'm joined by my very good friend and co-host Ted Essler from Missio Nexus. Ted, how's it going?
It's going well. And Matthew, I just want to say you haven't talked about swinging swords for a while, so don't let that slip on us.
I won't let it slip, man. Yeah, that's my phrase. I love swinging swords with God's people. In fact, I was just thinking the other day, writing down the names of people that I've been so blessed to do ministry with. And there's this bond of fellowship that occurs when you are engaged in this cause bigger than yourself, larger than your own interests. And so, Ted, it is a joy to swing swords with you, my friend.
Well, it's always a joy for me as well. Today on the call, we have with us Mark Luckey with Every Child Ministries. And right before we started the recording, I asked how Matthew and Mark knew each other. And it was, I guess, through a church coaching process, right, Matthew?
That's right. I worked with a church in Valparaiso, Indiana, and Mark was on the missions team there. Calvary Church went through our process and developed more of a strategic approach to missions. That's how we met.
So, for listeners out there, I would just say, if you're in a local church and your church is thinking, how could we get more intentional and how can we participate deeper? Matthew and his team at 1615 Outfitters, that's really what they focus on. And here it leads to lifelong relationships, evidently.
That's right. It sure does.
So, Mark, tell us a little bit about yourself and what your current role is, or what you're doing in your current ministry.
Thanks, Ted, and good to see you again, Matthew. I am an educator by profession, I guess you could say that, in the classroom and then as a school administrator, both in Africa. Several schools in Africa, as well as some in the U.S. My wife, Stacy, and I were called into missionary service back in the mid-90s. Went with Africa Inland Mission, which is an organization I'm sure you're very familiar with, and served with them for 12 years. And we're part of an evacuation in like the first 3 months of our time on the field. And I only mention that because it kind of started us on a 30-year journey of around Africa and the U.S., just kind of going wherever God directed, putting us in whatever position He wanted to in order to serve Him. That eventually led to my role here at Every Child Ministries as the executive director, where I've been now for about 10 years.
So, Mark, we're doing a couple of podcasts in a row today, and the content is related to Africa. We've got our next guest from Africa as well. And you mentioned you served there for a long time, and you've been involved there now through ECM. Mm-hmm. How has missions in Africa changed? Now, I realize Africa is a large continent, many countries, but I wonder from your perspective as someone who was boots on ground as a missionary, and you were there and you saw all those things happen, and now you're a ministry, you're domestic, but you have impact and work and field. What are the changes you've seen?
Yeah, I don't know with how much authority I can speak from a kind of a global perspective, but I can, I guess, speak from my own perspective and general observations. I think there's probably two broad areas where I've seen a lot of change. One would be in the physical side of things, and even the physical needs that Africans that we work with would have. Back in the 80s and even the 90s when I went to Africa, the economies have changed since then. If I compare like Kampala, Uganda, where I lived for quite a while, then and now, I mean, the economy is entirely different. we used to search around just to find a little, store to buy groceries in, and now I don't even remember how many big shopping malls there are. Um, so the infrastructure has changed. Roads are much better, which allows all of us to get around and get to more places. So the infrastructure has improved. Even the internet. I mean, when I first went to Africa, right, we wrote letters and we sent them back and forth through the mail. So
What are those?
yeah, exactly. What are those? So it would be like a month turnaround just to get any information to and from. So now we have internet in ECM, some of our villages now where we have internet. We can set up a computer lab and have internet connections there, which is fantastic. Maybe most significantly on that side of things, I think the needs of children has changed. Governments have taken a more expanded role in caring for their own children, which is good. They've stepped in. They've recognized, I think, some of the negative connotations and implications of institutionalized care, and are trying to do more to help their own kids, although they don't always have the resources, so they struggle to carry that out. I feel like sometimes back before we were doing triage, and now it's more like preventative health care and health maintenance that we do with these physical needs. So that's the physical side of things, but the spiritual side of things I think is also significant. Churches are stronger. They have more resources. They can accomplish a lot more kingdom building um, on their own without nearly as much assistance from Western organizations and churches.
So what's the mission of Every Child Ministries, and how do you carry that mission out?
So we're all about helping the most vulnerable kids, right? The most marginalized, the ones who are not getting the help that they need in their own communities. Kind of sometimes it's the outcasts. You have kids like with albinism or disabilities who are seen as cursed and are kind of literally outcast from their communities. But most often they're just in poverty and don't have the resources that others have. So they're marginalized and so on. So our desire is to see the lives of these kids transformed, right? And not transformed through the gospel. And then not only just for the sake of their own transformation, but so that they can turn around and be a part of the transformation in their own families, their own churches, their own communities. So in the end, we end up to be a very holistic type of ministry, right? The spiritual, the physical, providing hope for today, like meeting those physical needs. I'm hungry. Um, I need clothes. Hope for tomorrow, like, uh, hey, what does my future look like? And without an education, without training, what does my future really look like? And then, of course, hope for eternity, which is what we're aiming for in the end, is to find ways to introduce people to Jesus, connect them with Jesus, and get them moving in that direction, growing spiritually.
So, Mark, I know that ECM for a long time had a model of ministry that was always bigger than just child sponsorship. There was always a desire for transformation, but your primary emphasis was child sponsorship. And I know you've transitioned to more of a holistic, as you mentioned, community transformation model. I know child sponsorship is still a component of what you do, but maybe you can talk about that shift of emphasizing child sponsorship towards a larger community focus.
Yeah, it's a good question, but a big one. Maybe let me back up a little bit and just give a little framework for that. I think surprisingly, when I was on the field, my work was mostly in MK education, right? So I had a lot of interactions with nationals, but they were more peer-to-peer relationships and building friendships, not so much in the area of ministry to them. So when I joined ECM, I stepped out of that that MK education kind of mode. And we worked first as missionaries with ECM, just in a remote village. And and it was there that I kind of began to think about what would this look like, when you're ministering to these people who have such significant needs, and what community kind of ministry could look like. And I made all the classic mistakes, right? Like, doing things for them instead of with them, or determining like what they needed instead of working with them to figure out from their perspective, and 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 what resources do we have instead of what resources do you have. So we made all those classic mistakes, but somehow through that process, God still managed to make something good come out of that, and maybe significantly too, it changed my way of thinking on how we could do ministry. But when I stepped into the ministry at ECM, um, it really was nothing like that little microcosm of ministry in the village that we had been doing. ECM was doing a lot with like Saturday Bible clubs, and visiting homes, and mentoring, or and encouraging families and so on. And so my community model didn't fit very well, and I was also new to that kind of role, and I was just trying to keep my head above water, figure things out, and so I just kind of shelved it. Right, I just kind of shelved those that thinking for a while. But then, and here's to really answer your question, I think about 6 years ago, I was sitting in a meeting with our team in Uganda, and we're talking about the normal stuff. And then someone asked the question, was there anything we could do to help the entire family? And she had been, working with this family, and we had one kid in the sponsorship program, so it was good for him. But she's looking at and dealing with all of the other kids in the family, and seeing the stress on the family and the parents. And she just asked that simple question, which turned out to be a very complicated question. What could we do to help that entire family? And so the initial answer, to be honest, was nothing. Like, I don't know what to do for them. It's beyond our scope in our ministry. And so uh, just began to process that, and mull over that. And, what could we do to empower families to meet the needs of their children, of their own children, which is what we believe God intended, right? We believe God intended for those kids to be cared for by their parents. And kids are, by their very nature, dependent. The question isn't, are they going to be dependent? It's, who are they going to be dependent on? And we began to process that question. They shouldn't be dependent on us as a ministry. We shouldn't step in and usurp that role. That belongs to the parents. And um, but but I knew from my years of experience that the parents would struggle, but that they could do it with help. That if we were to come in and partner with them, that we could help them in that way, and that they could do this job that God had given them to do. So that's the long answer to your question, but really it was just a process of listening, learning, asking a lot of questions, and finally it really came down to what could ECM do, and it scared me to death, because it really was a shift in what we would be focusing on. And I knew that we would need a lot of help, and our staff would need a lot of help. There'd be a lot of work that had to be done.
Well, Mark, just being very honest with you here, I've been one of the folks out there that's been skeptical of sponsorship programs in the missions world. And I'm sure you've heard critiques, the paternalism, the low bar it sets for a church just by cutting a check. I mean, there's all sorts of things out there. I know you're still utilizing the model. Tell me what my kind of arrogant and ignorant opinion needs to be informed by to understand better how sponsorship can actually be a good contributor to the Global Great Commission?
Well, it's complicated, right? And you know that. But I'm with you. Like sponsorship, I don't think is the best solution for long-term sustainable impact on these communities. What we've seen in our own ministry is that it creates a dependency on the organization to do the work. And your thoughts are not misguided nor arrogant. I think they're accurate. The question is, just what role could child sponsorship have ongoing? And to me, and I don't know if other people feel this way or not, but child sponsorship is really a funding mechanism in many ways. It's a way to connect donors in the U.S. with the ministry, so they feel like it's personal, and I get that, and they are connecting these people with kids with real situations. I mean, we don't make up kids. I mean, that they're there, they're real, and for me, that's a way to connect people. That's not bad. The question for me is the programming. How can we help the kids in the best way? And I think for us, the best way for most kids, and there are exceptions to this, but the best way for most kids is to help their families. And the exceptions would be orphans, uh, or there is no reliable family to work with, or disabilities that would keep a caregiver from being able to provide for their family in the same, the way that God intended. So I think it's a matter of how we can operate programs, or what types of programs we can offer that can help grow and strengthen the entire family.
Mark, one of the things I've really appreciated about ECM is the foresight, insight, whatever you want to call it, to make that change. You've chosen the hard path. It'd be much easier to just have a bunch of kids that you get sponsored, and you got a Sunday, and I'm not saying there's some, like you said, it's not that there's not some good coming out of that impact, but I've so appreciated that you've seen beyond that, and to focus on the family empowerment and the community transformation. And as I've watched ECM, walk this path, a courageous path, by the way, because you said this is a lot harder, a lot more challenging. But one of the things you've talked about is how the condition of the soil determines the quality, or excuse me, the condition of the soil. I got this right. The quality of the outcomes. And in relation to a child's life, you're talking about the environment. Like, you can touch a kid's life, but if you don't change the environment that the kid lives in, it's not going to be lasting. It's not going to be sustainable. Can you expand on that? What does it look like? What are the components in the environment that you're focusing on?
Yeah, and because you walked that process with us, but I was challenged by my board early on to have sound reasoning behind this shift. And I remember we were at a board retreat, and I was sharing about this transition, and I was so excited because I've been thinking about this for probably 2 years, and kind of trying to bring this all together. And I had my fancy PowerPoint, and I presented that to the board, and really they just looked at me with deer in the headlight eyes, and the question that just screamed from them was, why? Why would you want to do this? What is the reason why you would want to make this big transition in our ministry? And I don't even think they realized how hard it would be. But they were asking that question, and I had realized I had never really processed that in the way that I could then turn around and explain it. And why exactly do we want to make this change? And so I was dejected. I went to bed that night and just prayed and prayed, like, God, you're going to have to, if this is your thing, you're going to have to show me how to explain it better. And in the morning, when something like this is what I explained to them. I said, our kids are like plants. They're like seedlings, right? Like they're very easy to damage. They're very tender. Um, we've been trying all these years to grow these plants and to make them strong, um, to become healthy and so on. And but we face an uphill battle because the soil that they're trying to grow in is not providing the nutrients that they need. And then the next big point there was, we are not the soil. ECM is not the soil. The kids, we can't provide those nutrients in the way that God intended. The soil is the church. The first one would be the family, right? That's the first key ingredient to give nutrient to the child. But the church is part of that. The schools, the entire community is a part of that process. And when I thought through that, and with that analogy, it made perfect sense in why we would want to do this, because there can be no transformation that's lasting at a community level. I can show you and give you plenty of examples of individual children who, just through regular child sponsorship, have done incredible things. But when you take a step back and you're looking at long-lasting impact in the community, you have to change the environment. And that's the only thing that can lead to that kind of long-lasting change for the better. And it starts with the family, right? That's the building block of society, and then continues on to the school, the church, and the entire community.
So, Mark, you probably know I wrote a book on innovation in ministry. And one of the principles in that book is understanding your mission and not elevating your methodology to the point that it becomes your mission. And when I hear your story, it sounds like one in which you as a leader understood the mission and then asked your staff, hey, I know you were, maybe hired to do this program over here. And, we've been focused on this, but those are methods. We're changing the method to better reach the mission. How long has that, maybe you're still processing that, but how long did that take for you to reorient your organization around this new innovative methodology that you have?
It's been several years, and what you said is exactly true. I mean, one of the things that I had to do was really carefully look at this and say, are we changing our mission or just the way we're going about the mission? And that's why I took a lot of time and didn't, I probably processed it a year before I really even went to the staff, and then 2 years before I went to the board, just to make sure that it was really, it was still our mission. So it was a long process. I didn't want to be in a hurry. The last thing I want to do, I mean, ECM's been around for 40 years, and I took over from the founders. And that's one of the things you think about as a leader who takes over from the founders are the changes that I want to make changing the very structure of the ministry and all that was, established over those first 30 years, or are we just changing the methodology? So a lot of thought, prayer, time went into that.
One of the things I love about this shift is that you're partnering churches with communities. And what has surfaced is a concept that you call community connection. Mm. And so as you're focusing on, transforming a community and field, you're also focusing on transforming a church community by, bringing them together. Can you talk about community connection?
Yeah, that really came about with our, through discussions with 1615, kind of a greater understanding of the role of the church in partnership with ministries like ECM, as an organization designed to come alongside the church. And we wanted to give an individual church the opportunity to grow its own, focus on missions, to say, we feel God is calling us to, but we don't know how to do that. So could ECM come alongside and just take a hand and say, hey, maybe in partnership with us, you can fulfill what God has called you to do. And so that's where the community connection idea came. Did a lot, of course, research on that as well, and other organizations doing similar things. We didn't create it out of the air. We just kind of took concepts and put them together. We're still growing that and learning that, but it does give churches an opportunity to partner with the community. I think that's an important concept, not just to be financially involved, but to literally partner, which requires face-to-face visits, not to do for them, or maybe worse yet, to tell them what to do, but to do things with them and to help the community make the best use of its own resources. How can the church come alongside and partner with them? So we just kind of open up that avenue of opportunity for them to do that.
Well, that's another kind of organizational shift or change, because when you talked about the sponsorship model, it was building a relationship with the donor. Now you're talking about building a relationship with the church. And again, kudos for leading an organization change process that I think aligns very well with what the scripture talks about in terms of the church's role in the Great Commission and the unfolding of the kingdom globally. So, Mark, if somebody wanted to find out more about ECM, tell us how they would do that.
Well, I guess that's probably the easiest question of the day so far. Got a great website that gives a lot of good information, ecmafrica.org.
ECM
Africa, okay. ecmafrica.org. You'll find all the relevant information there, contact information. People can contact me directly if they'd like to. I always love to discuss these kinds of things.
Awesome. Well, Mark, it's a joy swinging swords with you, as I like to say. And I just want to say, I am cheering you on. I'm praying for ECM. Ted talked about the courage and, innovating. I love that. We're not just focusing on the seedling, the plant. We need to amend the soil. We need to fertilize that soil. But then one step further, how do we take the church in the U.S. or wherever, could be Europe too, but how do we take a church that has a heart to do missions, and ECM acts as a connector? And then there's prayer and mutual transformation. One of the things we've talked about is it doesn't just transform the community that the church is focusing on. Through relationship and long-term commitment and connection, it's going to change that church as well. That's, connected to that community. So, brother, we're praying for you. Thank you, man. God bless the work of your hands.
All right. Thank you, Matthew. Thank you, Ted. Appreciate it.
Before you go, be sure to like, share, and subscribe so you don't miss the next episode. The Mission Matters podcast is a partnership of 1615 and Missio Nexus. Check out 1615.org and missionexus.org for more resources on the mission of God and the matters of the mission. The Mission Matters podcast is hosted by Matthew Ellison, president of 1615, and Ted Essler, president of Missio Nexus.